Whoa. You guys actually came back. I told you they would come back.
Not for long.
Thank you.
You don't seem to grasp this buzzing in your ear.
Welcome to the first episode of Cinematography 134, the kind of sister course of 101 where we're going to get a little more advanced. Today we'll be talking about the same stuff, ISO, frame rate, shutter angle and shutter speed, and aperture, but just in a deeper dive, showing you how you can manipulate those settings to help your storytelling. You probably don't want to look at whatever this is for too long, so let's just jump into it. ISO. Before we get into that, let's talk about dual native ISO. I did mention it in Cinematography 101. I kind of want to explain how that might be useful. Dual native ISO, I'm not going to get too technical because I can't, because I don't know, but essentially how it's been explained to me is two different circuits going into the sensor, and they're basically outputting different native ISOs. Generally, that's the first base around 500 to 800, and the second might be around 2500 to 5000. So this can help for a lot of reasons. It can help in documentary film work where you just need more light on the sensor and you can't source it from anywhere. Where it's helped me most is nighttime exteriors and more natural looking nighttime exteriors. And here's what I mean by that. With modern day digital cameras, having a base ISO of 800 was kind of phenomenal. Most film stocks, the highest it goes 500, and a lot of people would shoot 250 or whatever. So 800 let in a lot of light, and even though that's kind of standard to us now, that was a big change. That allowed you to shoot daytime interiors by a window and keep it really natural and have that natural soft light come through and use it. Well, for me, that's what dual native is for nighttime exteriors. You can go to Times Square, I can go to downtown Hollywood and have a 4,000 or 5,000 second base ISO and just use the available light. And that's kind of amazing because it allows you to shoot naturalistic, and that's kind of my preferred way of at least trying to shoot. But you can get these gorgeous cinematic images by placing your subject by like a bright neon light or maybe a lit up billboard, and it just allows you for a whole new vision and way of shooting. It also can save you money even if you have a lighting package. I've shot a lot of footage with like moonlit exteriors using that dual native ISO, and yeah, we strike lights on the set, but I have to use way less because that sensitivity is cool, man. Because the camera's just soaking up so much more light, so you can actually save money, and that way you can save time as well by setup. Alright, so that's dual native ISO in a nutshell. So why would you want to change your native ISO at all in the first place? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, depending on the camera you're using, you might want the grain. You might want a little texture in your image. If you are on something higher end like an Alexa and you shoot at 1600, that'll look kind of like film grain. Here's another example. I used to own the VariCam LT, one of the first cameras, or if not the first, that had dual native ISO. I purposely shot an entire short at 5000 ISO and just used a lot of ND filtration. So even daytime exteriors, daytime interiors, we were at 5000. And that's because the camera had a really specific fine grain at that level of ISO. I really dug that look. It gave the image a lot of texture and a lot of kind of interesting characteristics. So that's one reason you might want to adjust your ISO. The other is dynamic range. So your brightest of brights to the darkest of darks, you can actually manipulate where that falls when you change your ISO. So when you're shooting raw on a camera like a Red or Alexa, and this might be applicable to just ISOs in general on any camera, but don't quote me on that. I'm a great teacher, right? But when you shift your ISO, you're actually shifting your dynamic range. So when you go lower, you're seeing more into the darks. And when you go higher, You're seeing more into the highlights. Well, here's why that might be useful. Let's say you're in a daylit interior and the window is just a little blown out, but you kind of want to see through it. And you have a nice lighting package with you. So you've gotten really close, but you just want a quick fix to see outside that window. Maybe you're 1 or 2 stops short. Well, if you adjust your ISO, theoretically, this is how you get that result. Let's say you're at ISO 800, you're 1 stop short. So you boost your ISO to 1600, and then you put an ND filter on of 1 stop of light. What that does is shift your camera to see 1 stop more into the highlights, but it keeps your actual general exposure the exact same. You adjusted 1 stop up and then you shifted 1 down, but your ISO actually shifted the dynamic range. So that's another way to use ISO. Frame rates. So this one actually does cater more to the beginners. To get a slow motion, you'd think you lower the frame rate. That's not correct. You make it higher. And then in post, you make it read as 24 frames per second, which will give you that slow motion look. So we'll keep this one pretty quick. If you want slow motion, raise your frame rate. Some cameras go up to 60, some go up to 120, some go up to 240, or you have your specialty cameras like your Phantoms that go up to 1,000 plus. This is what gives you slow motion, but the thing to remember, the more you up your frame rate, the less light is coming in to your camera. So if your frame rates are way up there, you're gonna need more light. Also, if you're working with shutter angle, keep it at 180, it's all good. If you're working with shutter speed, again, remember, always double the frame rate. So if you're at 60 frames for slow-mo, now you wanna be at 1/120. If you're at 120 frames, now you wanna be at 1/240. Yeah, I took math class. So just keep that in mind, and keep in mind that you'll need more light. Yeah, so if you shoot at higher frame rates, sometimes your camera will convert it for you. Otherwise, put it in post, right click on the footage. Usually it's something like clip configuration, and it'll say the frame rate you shot it in, and then drop that to 24 frames per second, and it'll be slow-mo, baby. Okay, shutter angle, shutter speed. What do those do? Let's take a look. So they kind of work opposite. If you lower your shutter angle, it's the same effect as boosting your shutter speed. So if you lower your shutter angle to something like 90 degrees or 45 degrees, or if you raise your shutter angle to something like 1/60 or 1/120, but keeping your frame rate the same at 24 frames per second, you get kind of a unique jittery effect. This is used a lot in action scenes or fight scenes. Basically, it's less motion blur, but it's different from frame rate. When you raise your frame rate, I feel like it has kind of a smoother soap opera look with lack of motion blur, or kind of like that TV setting that people have on for no reason because it's disgusting. When you do this through your shutter angle or shutter speed, it's a much more cinematic feeling of less motion blur, but more impactful, more jittery. A classic example would be something like the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, which, if I'm not mistaken, actually does both. So let's get into that. If you raise your shutter angle to maybe 240 or 360, or if you lower your shutter speed to something like 1/25, you're going to get the reverse effect. You're going to get more motion blurred, but again, it's different than frame rate. So you might be able to use that for like a dreamlike quality, or where time kind of plane moment where time kind of slows down, but you're still keeping the same frame rate and the same momentum. Let's take a look at some examples.
I am change, I am. You can't seem to find your garden. When days are dull, you feel sullen. to grasp.
Okay, and
this
best way
buzzing in
always
your
is to try this yourself. Just go out and mess around with it. That's the best way you're going to actually understand how those settings on your camera work. Did I just do this? Sorry, I'll leave. And last but not least, Aperture, which we kind of went over all we need to go over in Cinematography 101. It's pretty self-explanatory. Lower the f-stop, more of a shallow depth of field, less it's going to be in focus. Higher the f-stop, deeper depth of field, more is going to be in focus. So you can completely use that to your personal liking depending on the scene. You might want a really shallow depth of focus on a character to make them feel isolated or singled out. You might want a really deep depth of focus to include the environment more and make the character feel part of their world. It's completely up to you. And that leads us to a good ending point, but also leads us into what Cinematography 134 is going to be more about. It's going to be a little more subjective. It's going to be a little more about storytelling. It's going to be about how to manipulate your settings, manipulate your lighting, your lens choices, etc. But kind of for how you see the world. There's not really a right or wrong here. The whole point is to evoke feelings in your audience. You don't want them to see your changes. You want them to feel your changes. And that's the trick with cinematography. Thank you for coming. That concludes our first official curriculum week and our first official week in general of the 101. Please ask questions, leave notes, leave comments, direct message me, email me. I want to hear from you guys so we can provide more content and better content. And I need material for our footnotes next week. I guess this is goodbye. Until next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
I'm the host. I can...
Have a good weekend.
Sorry. See you next
See you
time,
next time, guys. I can host this show better. Bye. Don't listen to him too much. Bye. Bye.